The clatter of hooves against hard-packed dirt filled the Montana Territory air as Zachary James clutched the reins of her father's wagon with trembling hands. The year was 1872, and at 22 years old, she was traveling west to marry a man she'd never met until a spray of gunfire split the afternoon sky and changed the course of her life forever. Stop the wagon. Now. A masked man yanked his horse alongside hers, the barrel of his revolver glinting in the harsh sunlight. Zachary pulled back on the reins, her heart hammering against her ribs. Two more riders appeared from behind rocky outcroppings, their faces concealed by bandanas. The lead outlaw dismounted, boots landing heavily in the dust. Well, what have we here? His eyes, the only visible part of his face, traveled the length of her, lingering on the gold locket at her throat. Traveling alone, miss, that's mighty dangerous in these parts. I'm expected in Silver Creek, Zachary replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. My fiancé will be looking for me if I don't arrive by sundown. The outlaw laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down her spine. Is that so? Well, I reckon he'll be disappointed. He gestured to his companions. Take her things, and the girl. Rough hands dragged Zachary from the wagon seat. She fought back, kicking and screaming, but a cloth pressed against her face silenced her protests. The sweet, chemical smell overwhelmed her senses as darkness claimed her consciousness. When Zachary awoke, the world was rocking beneath her. She was draped over a saddle, wrists bound together, a horse moving steadily beneath her. The sun had shifted position in the sky, telling her hours had passed. Panic rose in her throat as she realized she was being carried deeper into unknown territory. She's awake, one of the men called out. The leader rode closer. Good, we're almost there. And you'd best behave, Miss James. We know all about your wealthy daddy back east. He'll pay handsomely to get his precious daughter back in one piece. Zachary's blood ran cold. They'd planned this kidnapping, had known her name, her father's status. The marriage arrangement that had brought her west had been public knowledge in Boston. Her father had announced it proudly at his last social gathering. My father disowned me when I agreed to this marriage, she lied, hoping to discourage them. He won't pay a cent for me. The leader laughed again. Nice try, miss, but we've done our research. Now quiet down or you'll regret it. They rode for what felt like hours more, eventually arriving at a dilapidated cabin tucked deep in a forested valley. The outlaws roughly dismounted her, pushing her toward the door. Inside was sparse a table, a few chairs, a stove, and a single bed in the corner. Home sweet home, the leader said, removing his mask to reveal a weathered face with a jagged scar running down one cheek. I'm Silas, that's Abel and Wyatt. You'll be our guest until your father pays up. How long will that take? Zachary asked, rubbing her raw wrists. However long it takes to get word to Boston and back. Could be weeks, Silas shrugged. Make yourself comfortable. Zachary was tied to a chair while Abel penned a ransom note. They knew her father's address, his business connections, everything. She watched as Wyatt took the note and rode out, presumably to find a way to deliver it east. As night fell, Zachary was permitted to lie on the bed, though her ankle was tied to the frame. She stared at the ceiling, despair washing over her. The husband she'd never met would assume she'd changed her mind. Her father might refuse to pay, thinking this was some ploy of hers to avoid the marriage she'd reluctantly agreed to. She was alone, with no hope of rescue. Miles Vega had been tracking the Blackwater Gang for 3 weeks. At 30 years old, he'd built a reputation as one of the most skilled trackers and bounty hunters in the territory. The gang had robbed 2 stagecoaches and a bank in the past month, leaving 3 men dead. The bounty on their heads would set him up nicely enough to finally buy that piece of land he'd had his eye on for years. He'd picked up their trail just outside Silver Creek, following it carefully through the wilderness. When he came across an abandoned wagon on the main trail, he initially passed it by, assuming it was just another unfortunate breakdown. But something made him circle back, a lady's bonnet lying in the dirt, a trunk of feminine belongings scattered across the ground. Miles dismounted his horse, examining the scene carefully. Boot prints, at least 3 men. Smaller footprints, a woman's. Signs of a struggle. This wasn't a robbery, it was an abduction. The tracker in him took over as he studied the ground. The gang had headed northeast into the mountains. Whoever they'd taken was in serious danger. The Blackwater Gang wasn't known for their gentle treatment of captives. Miles hesitated only briefly. His target was the gang. The abducted woman was simply additional motivation. He swung back onto his horse and urged it forward, following the fresh tracks deeper into the wilderness. By the second day of her captivity, Zachary had mapped every inch of the cabin in her mind. She'd counted the steps between the bed and the door, noted which floorboards creaked, observed the routine of her captors. Silas was clearly in charge, with Abel deferring to him on all matters. They took turns guarding her, though they seemed less concerned about her escaping and more worried about someone finding them. "How far are we from Silver Creek?" she asked Abel as he brought her a plate of beans for dinner. He eyed her suspiciously. "Far enough. Don't get any ideas about running." "There's nothing but wilderness for miles. You'd be dead in a day." "I was merely curious," Zachary replied, keeping her tone light. "My fiancé lives there. Joseph Blackwell is his name. Do you know him?" Abel snorted. "Blackwell, that rich rancher. That's who you're supposed to marry." Zachary nodded, watching his reaction carefully. "Well, ain't that something? Blackwell's been trying to buy out every small ranch around here, offers pennies on the dollar, then threatens folks who won't sell." Abel spat on the floor. "No wonder Silas was so keen on grabbing you. Hitting Blackwell in his pocketbook must be extra satisfying." This new information stunned Zachary. Her father had described Joseph Blackwell as a respectable businessman expanding his holdings in the West, not as a man who bullied others out of their land. Another lie among many, she supposed. That night, as she lay awake listening to the snores of her captors, Zachary heard something unusual, a whisper of movement outside the cabin. She tensed, straining to hear. It could be an animal, but something told her it wasn't. The soft crunch of boots on pine needles was too deliberate. The door eased open with barely a creak. A silhouette appeared against the night sky, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the silent precision of a predator. In the dim moonlight filtering through the cabin's single window, she saw him draw a gun. Zachary held her breath, eyes wide as the stranger moved toward the sleeping forms of Silas and Abel. He stood over Silas first, pressing the barrel of his gun against the outlaw's temple. "Wake up, Blackwater," the stranger whispered, his voice low and dangerous. "Make a sound and it'll be your last." Silas's eyes flew open, widening at the sight of the gun. The stranger quickly bound his hands, then moved to Abel, repeating the process before either man could raise an alarm. Only when both outlaws were secured did the stranger turn his attention to Zachary. He moved to the bed, knife in hand, and she flinched away instinctively. "Easy," he murmured, cutting the rope that bound her ankle to the bed frame. "I'm not going to hurt you, madam." In the faint light, she could make out his features, dark hair falling across his forehead, several days' worth of stubble on his jaw, and intense eyes that studied her with concern. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Miles Vega, bounty hunter." He offered her a hand. "Let's get you out of here before their friend returns." Zachary took his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet. Her legs trembled beneath her after days of limited movement. "There's a third man," she warned, steadying herself against Miles's arm. "Wyatt. He left yesterday with a ransom note." Miles nodded. "I know. I've been watching the cabin since yesterday afternoon. Saw him leave. We need to move quickly. He could return any time." He turned to the bound outlaws. "Where's your payment, Silas? The money from the Silver Creek Bank." Silas glared but remained silent. Abel, however, was more forthcoming. "Under the floorboards by the stove," he said, ignoring Silas's murderous look. "Just take it and let me go. I was against kidnapping the girl from the start." "Shut your mouth, Abel," Silas hissed. Miles located the loose board and pulled out a canvas bag. He quickly checked the contents, then tucked it into his saddlebag. "Both of you are going back to Silver Creek to face trial," he said, "for robbery and kidnapping." He secured them more thoroughly, then turned to Zachary. "Can you ride, miss?" "James, Zachary James, and yes, I can ride." "Good. We'll take their horses. It's a long journey back to Silver Creek and we'll need to move fast." Outside, the night air felt like freedom to Zachary. She took deep breaths, gazing up at the stars while Miles prepared the horses. He helped her mount one of the outlaw's horses, then tied selas and able to their saddles on the remaining animals. "Stay close to me," Miles instructed as they set off into the darkness. "The territory between here and Silver Creek is dangerous, especially at night." They rode for several hours, putting distance between themselves and the cabin. Miles set a pace that was quick but manageable, occasionally glancing back to ensure their prisoners were secure and Zachary was keeping up. When the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Miles led them to a small clearing beside a creek. "We'll rest here for a while," he said, helping Zachary dismount. "You must be exhausted." Now that she could see him clearly in the morning light, Zachary was struck by Miles's appearance. He wasn't conventionally handsome like the suitors her father had paraded before her in Boston, but there was something compelling about his weathered face, the quiet confidence in his movements, the intelligence in his eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, as he handed her a canteen of water. "For rescuing me," Miles shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's my job to bring in the Blackwater Gang. You were just fortunate timing. Nevertheless, I'm grateful." She took a sip of water. "How did you find me?" "I was tracking them already. They're wanted for robbery and murder. Found your wagon on the trail, saw signs of a struggle." He glanced at her. "Were you traveling alone?" Zachary nodded. "I was on my way to Silver Creek to marry Joseph Blackwell. It was an arranged match, my father's business partner's son." Something flickered across Miles's face at the mention of Blackwell. "You're Blackwell's bride." "I was supposed to be." She looked down at her hands. "Though after what happened, I'm not sure what awaits me in Silver Creek. Or if I even want to continue there at all." Miles was quiet for a moment, then said, "Blackwell isn't well regarded by many in these parts. He's wealthy, but his methods are questionable, so I've heard." Zachary met his gaze. "My captors seem to have a personal grudge against him." "That doesn't surprise me." Miles busied himself checking the ropes binding their prisoners. "We should reach Silver Creek by tomorrow evening if we maintain a good pace. You can decide what to do when we get there." They resumed their journey after a brief rest, with Miles leading the way through increasingly rugged terrain. He moved with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the land, choosing paths that seemed indistinguishable to Zachary's untrained eye. As they rode, he pointed out landmarks and taught her how to recognize signs of water and wildlife. Zachary found herself captivated not just by the lessons, but by the teacher. There was something refreshingly honest about Miles Vega, a stark contrast to the society men she'd known in Boston with their practiced charm and hidden agendas. By midday, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. "There's a line shack about an hour ahead," Miles said, studying the sky with concern. "We should try to reach it before the storm hits." They urged their horses to a faster pace, but the storm moved more quickly than anticipated. Within minutes, rain began to fall in heavy sheets, soaking them to the skin and turning the trail to mud. Thunder crashed overhead as lightning split the sky. Miles pointed to a rocky outcropping. "There, we can take shelter until the worst passes." They made their way to the natural shelter, Miles dismounting first to help Zachary down from her horse. Their prisoners complained bitterly as rain lashed their faces, but Miles merely secured them to a boulder, making sure they were out of the worst of the downpour before turning his attention to Zachary. The overhang provided minimal protection, but it was better than nothing. Miles removed his coat and placed it around Zachary's shoulders despite her protests. "You're shivering," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Can't have you catching pneumonia before we reach Silver Creek. What about you?" she asked, noting his soaked shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. "I'm used to worse." He settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him despite the chill air. They sat in companionable silence, watching the rain turn the landscape into a blur of gray and green. Zachary found herself studying Miles's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar at his temple, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings even in this moment of relative safety. "Have you always been a bounty hunter?" she asked. Miles shook his head. "Started out as a ranch hand, did some scouting for the army during the war, fell into tracking outlaws after that." He glanced at her. Pays better than cowboying, and I'm good at it. You must be to have tracked the Blackwater Gang so effectively. A small smile touched his lips. They weren't exactly covering their tracks. Arrogance makes criminals sloppy. And what about you, Miss James? What brings a Boston society lady all the way out here to marry a man she's never met? Zachary sighed, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. My father's business is failing. The marriage was essentially a transaction my hand for Blackwell's investment. She met his gaze directly. I had little choice in the matter. There's always a choice, Miles said quietly. Easy to say when you're not a woman with no means of supporting herself, she replied without bitterness. But yes, I suppose I could have refused and faced destitution instead. Miles was silent for a moment. The West offers opportunities for those willing to work hard, man or woman. He nodded toward the landscape beyond their shelter. This land doesn't care about your family name or social standing. It only respects strength, determination, and intelligence. His eyes met hers. You seem to have all three in abundance. Zachary felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. Before she could respond, a sound caught Miles's attention, hoofbeats approaching through the rain. He was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. Stay back, he whispered, positioning himself between Zachary and the approaching rider. A horse emerged from the curtain of rain, its rider hunched against the storm. Zachary recognized him immediately. It's Wyatt, she whispered to Miles. The third member of the gang, Miles nodded, raising his gun as the rider drew closer. Hold it right there, Wyatt. He called out when the man was within earshot. Hands where I can see them. Wyatt reacted instantly, reaching for his gun, but Miles was faster. A shot rang out and Wyatt clutched his arm, cursing as his weapon fell to the ground. Next one won't be a warning, Miles said calmly. Dismount. Slowly. Wyatt complied, rage evident on his face as he spotted his bound companions. Who the hell are you? The man who's taking you back to Silver Creek to hang, Miles replied, binding Wyatt's hands despite his wounded arm. Seems like the Blackwater Gang's luck has finally run out. With all three outlaws secured, Miles checked Wyatt's wound, determining it was painful but not life-threatening. The rain began to ease as he finished, sunlight breaking through the clouds. We should move, Miles said to Zachary. The trail will be muddy, but we need to cover more ground before nightfall. They continued their journey, with Zachary riding alongside Miles while the outlaws followed behind. The landscape grew more familiar to Miles as they approached Silver Creek, and he pointed out landmarks with increasing frequency. That ridge marks the border of Blackwell's property, he said as they crested a hill late in the afternoon of their second day of travel. His ranch house is about 5 miles beyond. Zachary gazed at the vast expanse of land stretching before them. It's beautiful country. It is, Miles agreed, a note of something like longing in his voice. Some of the best grazing land in the territory. Blackwell's been buying up homesteads all around here, sometimes by less than honorable means. What do you mean? Miles hesitated. It's not my place to speak ill of your future husband. Please, Zachary urged. I'd rather know the truth now than discover it later. Miles sighed. There have been reports of cattle rustled from smaller ranches, water sources mysteriously drying up, fences cut. Nothing that can be directly tied to Blackwell, but the troubles seem to affect only those who refuse his offers to buy their land. He glanced at her. The law can't prove anything, but everyone knows. Zachary felt her stomach twist. And this is the man my father chose for me. Your father probably only saw a successful businessman expanding his holdings. From Boston, that's what it would look like. Miles's expression softened. You don't have to go through with it, the marriage. Don't I? Zachary smiled sadly. What are my alternatives? Return to Boston in disgrace, try to make my way alone in a territory where I know no one. Before Miles could respond, a gunshot cracked through the air. His horse reared as something whizzed past Zachary's head. Get down, Miles shouted, pulling her from her saddle and into the cover of nearby rocks as more shots rang out. Their prisoners took advantage of the confusion, kicking their horses into motion and galloping away despite their bound hands. Damn it, Miles muttered, peering cautiously around the rocks. At least 5 men on that ridge, wearing Blackwell's brand. He turned to Zachary, his expression grim. Looks like your fiancé sent a welcoming party. But why would they be shooting at us? Zachary asked, her heart racing. Good question. Miles checked his ammunition. Stay here. I'm going to try to reach them, explain who we are. No, Zachary grabbed his arm. They could kill you before you get close enough to speak. Miles hesitated, then nodded. You're right, we need a different approach. He removed his bandana and tied it to the barrel of his rifle, then raised it above the rocks. Hello, the ridge, he called out. We're friendly. I've got Zachary James with me, Joseph Blackwell's fiancé. The shooting stopped. After a tense moment, a voice called back. Prove it. Miles looked at Zachary. They need to see you. Zachary swallowed hard, then nodded. I'll go. They won't shoot a woman. Not alone, Miles said firmly. We go together. They emerged slowly from behind the rocks, hands raised. Zachary stepped forward, chin high despite her fear. I am Zachary James, she called out. I was due in Silver Creek 3 days ago to marry Joseph Blackwell. I was kidnapped on the trail by the Blackwater Gang. This man rescued me. There was movement on the ridge as the men conferred. Finally, one rider separated from the group and approached cautiously. Miss James. The man reined in his horse a few yards away, studying her face. Mr. Blackwell's been searching for you since you didn't arrive. Found your wagon abandoned on the trail. As I said, I was kidnapped, Zachary replied. Mr. Vega here tracked the outlaws and freed me. The rider's eyes shifted to Miles, narrowing with recognition. Vega, the bounty hunter, Miles nodded once. The same, I was after the Blackwater Gang. Found them holding Miss James captive. Where are they now? They were our prisoners until your shooting spooked the horses, Miles said, a note of accusation in his voice. They've escaped, the rider swore under his breath. Mr. Blackwell won't be pleased about that. He tipped his hat to Zachary. Madam, if you'll come with us, we'll escort you to the ranch. Mr. Blackwell's been worried sick. Zachary glanced at Miles, reluctant to part ways so suddenly. Mr. Vega should be compensated for his assistance, she said. And he deserves to collect the bounty on the Blackwater Gang, even if they've temporarily escaped. The rider hesitated, then nodded. He can accompany us to the ranch. Mr. Blackwell will want to thank him personally, I'm sure. They collected their remaining horses and joined the riders from Blackwell's ranch. As they rode toward Silver Creek, Zachary found herself drawing her horse alongside Miles's. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Miles studied her face. What will you do now? What I came here to do, I suppose, meet Joseph Blackwell. And if you don't like what you find, Zachary smiled sadly, then I'll face that decision when it comes. The Blackwell Ranch was impressive, a sprawling main house surrounded by numerous outbuildings, corrals filled with prime cattle, and bunkhouses for the many ranch hands. As they approached, a man emerged from the main house, striding purposefully toward them. Joseph Blackwell was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered and commanding. His face might have been handsome once, but years of hard living had carved deep lines around his mouth and eyes. He helped Zachary dismount with a proprietary air that made her skin crawl. Miss James. I'm relieved to see you safe. His smile didn't reach his eyes as they swept over her travel-worn appearance. When you didn't arrive, I feared the worst. She was kidnapped by the Blackwater Gang, Miles said, dismounting nearby, held for ransom. Blackwell's attention shifted to Miles, his expression cooling noticeably. Vega, I might have known you'd be involved somehow. You know each other, Zachary asked, surprised by the evident tension. We've had dealings, Blackwell said dismissively. Come inside, Miss James. You must be exhausted. We can discuss what happened over dinner. Mr. Vega deserves compensation for saving me, Zachary insisted, and information about the bounty on the outlaws who took me. Blackwell's jaw tightened briefly before he forced another smile. Of course, business first then. He turned to one of his men. Take Miss James inside, see that she's comfortable. To Miles, he said, my office. Now, Zachary was reluctant to leave, but the events of the past days had taken their toll. She allowed herself to be led inside, where a housekeeper showed her to a guest room with a steaming bath waiting. Mr. Blackwell had us prepare when word came you'd been found, the woman explained. Dinner will be served in 2 hours. Alone at last, Zachary sank into the bath, grateful for the warmth but troubled by the interaction she'd witnessed. There was clearly bad blood between Miles and her fiancé, and Blackwell's cold reception of her rescuer spoke volumes about his character. As she dressed in clean clothes provided by the housekeeper, Zachary made a decision. She would meet with Blackwell, hear what he had to say, but she would not commit to anything until she understood the situation fully. Downstairs, she found Blackwell waiting in an opulent dining room. Miles was nowhere to be seen. "Where is Mr. Vega?" she asked as she took her seat. "Gone," Blackwell replied, pouring wine into her glass. "I paid him for his services and sent him on his way." Disappointment washed over Zachary. She'd hoped for a chance to say a proper goodbye. "Now," Blackwell continued, "I understand you've had quite an ordeal, but you're safe now and we can proceed with our plans. The minister can perform the ceremony as early as tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Zachary nearly choked on her wine. "Mr. Blackwell, I've only just arrived after a traumatic experience. Surely we can take some time to become acquainted before rushing into marriage." Blackwell's expression hardened. "Your father and I have an agreement, Miss James. The paperwork has been signed. The announcement was made weeks ago." "Nevertheless, I would prefer to wait," she insisted. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." Blackwell set down his glass. "Your father's investment in my operations was predicated on this marriage taking place immediately upon your arrival. Any delay could jeopardize our business arrangements." "I see." Zachary felt cold despite the warm room. "So this is purely a business transaction to you." "Most marriages are in one form or another," he replied matter-of-factly. "But I'm sure we'll get along well enough. You're certainly pleasing to look at despite your current dishevelment." Zachary pushed her plate away, appetite gone. "Mr. Blackwell, I've heard concerning things about your business practices since arriving in the territory." His eyes narrowed. "From whom? That bounty hunter. Vega has a personal vendetta against me. His family owned a small parcel of land I needed for water access. They refused to sell despite my generous offer. And what happened to them? Bad luck, nothing more. Their cattle developed mysterious ailments. Their crops failed. Eventually, they saw reason and sold to me." Blackwell shrugged. "Business can be difficult out here." Zachary felt sick. "You forced them out." "I made a business decision." Blackwell leaned forward. "As your father did when he arranged our marriage. He needed my investment to save his failing business, and I needed a wife of good breeding to solidify my social standing. It's a fair exchange. And if I refuse," Blackwell's smile was cold, "then your father loses everything. Are you prepared to be responsible for that?" Zachary stood, trembling with anger. "I need air. Excuse me." She walked out onto the porch, breathing deeply of the evening air. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in fiery oranges and pinks. In other circumstances, she might have found it beautiful. Now it felt like a prison sentence. "Miss James." She turned, startled to find Miles Vega standing in the shadows at the edge of the porch. "Mr. Vega, I thought you'd gone." "I started to." He stepped closer, moonlight illuminating his troubled expression. But something didn't sit right. "Blackwell was too eager to get rid of me." "He told me he paid you." Miles nodded. "He did, more than fair. But then I overheard him instructing his men to follow me, make sure I left the territory entirely." His eyes met hers. "And I heard something else about your father." Zachary's heart skipped. "What about him?" "He's been trying to reach you. Sent telegrams to Silver Creek saying the marriage agreement is off. Apparently, he discovered some troubling information about Blackwell's business dealings." "Blackwell didn't mention any telegrams," Zachary said, her mind racing. "He said my father would lose everything if I didn't go through with the marriage. It's a lie. Your father's last telegram said he'd rather go bankrupt than see you married to a man like Blackwell." Miles pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "The telegraph operator in Silver Creek is a friend. He gave me a copy when I stopped in town before coming out here." Zachary read the telegram with shaking hands. "To Zachary James, stop marriage agreement with Blackwell void, stop, do not proceed, stop, return home immediately, stop, father." "Why would Blackwell lie about this?" she whispered. "Because he needs this marriage to happen," Miles explained. "Not for the money, he has plenty of that, but for the respectability your family name brings. There's talk of him running for territorial governor next year." A proper Eastern wife would help his image considerably. Zachary's mind whirled with this new information. I need to leave, tonight. That's why I came back, Miles said. I have horses waiting beyond the south pasture, but we need to move quickly. Why are you helping me? Zachary asked, searching his face. You've already done more than enough. Miles hesitated, then said quietly, because in the 2 days we traveled together, I saw someone worth fighting for. Someone brave and intelligent who deserves better than being traded like cattle in a business deal. His words warmed something deep inside her. Lead the way, Mr. Vega. They slipped away from the house, keeping to the shadows. Miles led her through the ranch's extensive grounds, expertly avoiding the patrolling ranch hands. When they reached the southern fence line, 2 saddled horses were indeed waiting, hidden in a stand of trees. How far to Silver Creek? Zachary asked as Miles helped her mount. About 3 hours' ride. We can be there before midnight, catch the early stage east tomorrow. They rode in silence for the first hour, pushing the horses as fast as they dared in the darkness. Zachary's mind was filled with questions about what would happen next. Return to Boston, face her father. The future seemed suddenly uncertain, yet strangely full of possibility. When they stopped briefly to rest the horses at a small stream, Zachary turned to Miles. What will you do after you've seen me safely to Silver Creek? Miles shrugged. Continue bounty hunting, I suppose. The Blackwater Gang is still out there. And after that, he glanced at her, then away. I've been saving to buy land, a small ranch of my own. His voice softened. There's a place north of here. Good water, decent grazing, nothing fancy, but it could be something with hard work. It sounds wonderful, Zachary said sincerely. It's a hard life, Miles warned. Nothing like what you're used to in Boston. Perhaps I'm ready for something different than what I'm used to. She met his gaze steadily. Boston never felt like home to me, always too many rules, too many expectations. Before Miles could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. He tensed, listening. Blackwell's men, he said grimly. They must have discovered you missing sooner than I expected. They remounted quickly, pushing their horses into a gallop, but their pursuers had fresher mounts and the advantage of knowing the territory. Within minutes, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder behind them. There's a canyon ahead, Miles called to her over the thunder of their horses' hooves. If we can reach it, there are places to hide. They pushed forward, but as they approached the canyon entrance, shots rang out. Riders appeared on the ridge above them, cutting off their escape route. Miles pulled his horse alongside Zachary's, shielding her with his body. When I say so, make for those rocks to the right, he instructed, drawing his gun. I'll hold them off. I won't leave you, she protested. You have to. Someone needs to reach Silver Creek. Send word to your father about what Blackwell's doing. His eyes met hers, intense and determined. Trust me, Zachary. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. More riders appeared behind them. They were surrounded. Well, well, Blackwell's voice called out as he rode forward. I'm disappointed, Miss James, running away on the eve of our wedding. His cold gaze shifted to Miles. And you, Vega, I should have known you'd interfere. Let her go, Blackwell, Miles said, his gun steady in his hand. She knows the truth about you now. Her father's canceled the marriage agreement. Has he? Blackwell smiled unpleasantly. That changes nothing. Miss James will still become my wife, willingly or not. And you, Vega, won't live to see the sunrise. He raised his hand, about to signal his men to fire, when a new voice rang out. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Blackwell. Everyone turned to see a group of riders emerging from the canyon, men wearing badges, led by a grim-faced marshal. What is this? Blackwell demanded. Joseph Blackwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder, the marshal announced. We have sworn statements from 3 members of the Blackwater Gang that you hired them to stage robberies and terrorize ranchers who wouldn't sell to you. That's absurd, Blackwell sputtered. You can't believe the word of outlaws. We also have testimony from your former foreman about your involvement in burning out the Vega family 5 years ago. The marshal nodded to Miles. Your brother's deathbed statement was finally corroborated. Zachary looked at Miles, seeing the mix of pain and vindication on his face. So this was the history between them. Blackwell had not only forced Miles's family off their land, but had apparently been responsible for his brother's death. Blackwell's men, seeing the law's arrival, began to back away from their employer. Within minutes, Blackwell was in custody, his protests falling on deaf ears as the marshal's men led him away. The marshal approached Miles and Zachary. "Miss James, your father's been trying to reach you. Sent telegrams all over the territory when he learned what kind of man Blackwell really was." "I know," she replied. "Mr. Vega told me. You're free to return east whenever you're ready. The stage leaves tomorrow morning." The marshal tipped his hat and rode after his deputies. In the sudden quiet, Zachary turned to Miles. "Your family, I'm so sorry." Miles's expression was solemn. "It's been a long time coming, that justice. My brother would rest easier now." "What will you do?" she asked again. "Go after the Blackwater Gang still. Then maybe finally buy that land I've been eyeing." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? Back to Boston?" Zachary took a deep breath. "I don't think so. I've seen enough of the West now to know there's opportunity here, for someone willing to work hard." "It's a difficult life for a woman alone," Miles cautioned. "Perhaps I won't be alone." She met his gaze steadily. "Unless I've misread certain things." Miles's expression softened. "You haven't." He dismounted, then helped her down from her horse. Standing close together under the vast starlit sky, he took her hands in his. "I have nothing to offer you but a dream, Zachary, a piece of land that needs years of work, a life that will never be easy." "You offered me a choice," she replied. "When everyone else was making decisions for me, you showed me I could choose my own path." She squeezed his hands. "And I choose you, Miles Vega, if you'll have me." His smile was slow and genuine, warming his entire face. "I'll have you," he whispered, drawing her closer. "For as long as you'll have me." Their first kiss was gentle, a promise exchanged under the endless Montana sky. 6 months later, Zachary stood on the porch of a small but sturdy cabin, watching Miles mend a fence in their south pasture. Their ranch was modest 50 acres of good land, with a creek running through it, purchased with Miles's bounty money, and a small inheritance Zachary had received from her grandmother. Her father had been surprisingly supportive once he understood her decision. He'd even sent a wedding gift breeding stock that would form the foundation of their herd. Miles looked up, catching her watching him. He smiled and waved, then finished his task and walked toward the cabin. 5 years had passed since Blackwell had forced his family from their land. Now Miles had a new beginning, a chance to build something lasting. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked as he climbed the porch steps. "Just counting my blessings," Zachary replied, moving into his embrace. "Do you remember what you said to me that night after Blackwell was arrested?" Miles smiled against her hair. "I believe I said something about having nothing to offer you but a dream, and now look at us." She gestured to their small but growing ranch. "The dream is becoming real." All because of a kidnapping, a rescue, and a very brave woman who decided to choose her own path. Miles kissed her softly. "I'm grateful every day that your path led to me." Zachary smiled up at her husband. "As am I, though next time I travel west, I think I'll bring an armed escort." Miles laughed and pulled her closer. "No need. You've got a cowboy now, Mrs. Vega, and I'm never letting you go." Together they stood on their porch, watching the sun set over the land. They both now called home a home built on choice, courage, and a love that had begun in the most unexpected of circumstances.